Kirksville home. Kirksville is a town in northern Missouri, home of Truman State University and A.T. Still University. I'm your host, Leighya McNeely, and I'm going to be sharing the stories of the people who have made Kirksville their home. In this episode, our guest is Joe Benevento, and they're going to talk about their experience of growing up in Richmond Hill, a neighborhood in Queens, and then moving out to the Midwest and eventually landing in Kirksville, Missouri. Hey, so would you mind introducing yourself and telling us where you grew up?
Well, I'm Joe Benevento. I teach English and creative writing here at Truman State. I grew up in a working class neighborhood in Queens known as Richmond Hill.
And so what was it like growing up in Richmond Hills?
Well, Richmond Hill was one of those neighborhoods that underwent a lot of change and is still. When I was a little child, it was a almost exclusively white neighborhood, working class, Irish, German, Italian, Polish folks. By the time I was around 9 or 10, or maybe a little sooner, the first African American family started moving in. And sadly, that caused some white flight on the part of many of the other people in the neighborhood. We stayed, in part because my mother never had a problem with people of other races or religions. She was very much judging people on their merits. So we stayed in the neighborhood, and by the time I was maybe 14, it was almost, it was 90% African American and Latino. And so I grew up with lots of Latino and African American friends. After I moved from that neighborhood, there was a large influx of Asian immigrants, and now it's got lots of people from Asia, and also people of Indian ethnicity who more recently were living in the West Indies, especially in Guyana. There's a really big segment of those folks who have moved to that part of Queens.
And what was it like? How was your home life with your family in Queens?
Well, I'm part of a large family. I'm the fifth of 7 children. We lived in a 3-bedroom house, modest house in Queens. Lots of Italian-American customs, special, for example, our Christmas Eve dinner, like many Italian-Americans in that part of the world, was always a seafood dinner with multiple seafood offerings. The church was a big part of my family's life. We went to Catholic school, both grammar school and high school. Almost all the children did both of those. The same grammar school, but various different high schools across Queens. And lots of music. We loved to sing. We never had much money. My father was a construction worker and later a janitor. My mother was a homemaker and then later got some part-time work as someone to help people who needed help in their homes. And also we used to take extra people people who needed help. For example, we took in an infant because the mother was a single mother and had to work. And within a year, we also took her in. She was a Greek immigrant, and those 2 folks lived with us for about 6 years before they moved back to Greece. So I sort of had an extra brother for that time. The house was always really crowded. There was always a lot of good food, though. We didn't even realize we were poor because my mother was a great money manager. And, lots of Italian-American music, but also our music that we liked, Motown and rock and that kind of thing. So it was a very vibrant time. Of course, I'm old enough. I was a baby boomer, and there were just children and people our age, super crowded neighborhoods. For example, first grade class had 60 students, and that was in a little Catholic school that we went to a block from our house. And then walking distance, there was another such school with 60 students in their classes. It's hard to fathom. My wife's a kindergarten teacher, and she has maybe 10 students now here in Kirksville. So when I show those old pictures, and I have a few of, 50, 60 kids in one class, people find it hard to believe. But so I'm glad we have the photos to prove it.
So how did you decide where to go for college?
Yeah, I went for high school to Cathedral Preparatory Seminary. I was giving some thought to the priesthood, and that was the first step. But I decided by senior year that because the Catholic Church insists on celibacy, that might not be right for me. I wanted to have a family. So I didn't know. Here at Truman we have the McNair program, which helps first generation and minority students figure out how to go to college and once they're in college, how to maybe consider graduate school. We didn't have anything like that. I didn't even know anybody who had gone to college, except maybe a couple of the teachers. And so I just, I picked Columbia because I'd heard of it. I picked NYU because I'd heard of it. And I applied to those two schools. I got a Regent Scholarship. That's what the state of New York would give to any student who had passed a test with a certain score. And then NYU matched that scholarship. Tuition back then at NYU was $2,700 my first year. Now it's about $50,000 or $60,000. But we could hardly afford that. I got about $2,200 in scholarship, and we had to scratch up the other $500. I chose NYU over Columbia because I didn't know what Ivy League school even meant. I just knew it was a division of teams that played each other in football and basketball. I didn't know anything else about Ivy League. And NYU was a closer subway ride than Columbia was. And I had a crush on a girl who I knew was going to NYU. So those are my reasons for choosing NYU over Columbia. Not the greatest reasons, but it all worked out. NYU at the time wasn't quite as stellar a reputation. Its stock has gone way up. So now when I tell people I went to NYU, they think, wow. But NYU was more of a commuter school at that time and more accessible to the working class folks. So I really enjoyed my experience there, hanging out in Greenwich Village for those years. But as far as choosing it for any particular reason, it was just two schools I'd heard of and heard were good. And so I applied and I got in, I got scholarships, and just kind of the luck of the draw that I wound up at NYU.
And then you went to other schools after NYU, correct?
Yeah, sophomore year, met a young woman, a Cuban refugee, Carmen Seed, and we started dating and got serious pretty quickly. We were engaged. And she wanted to go to graduate school in plant ecology. She was a scientist, and she didn't figure that New York City was a great place to study ecology. So we had to get out of town, and we applied to a bunch of schools, and the best deal for both of us was at Ohio State. So we moved there and got our masters. She didn't like Ohio State that much, so we looked again, and this time we both wound up at Michigan State. That's where we got our PhDs, and she never really was crazy about Kirksville, so eventually we parted ways, and she wound up in Connecticut. So she found herself a place where she was happier. But yeah, I originally went west because of her, because she wanted to go to graduate school. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I liked to sing. I was thinking about trying to pursue that. I didn't know anything I never thought about teaching college. Actually, I thought maybe I'm not making it as a singer, I could be a high school teacher. Then I found out you have to take all kinds of education classes to be a high school teacher. Then someone said, but you don't have to do that to teach college. And I thought, how could that be? Oh, it's true. And it was true. I got the first section of Comp 1 I taught at Ohio State. We had 1 week of training, and that was it. It was time to go teach composition. But anyway, I liked teaching right from the beginning, and so I stuck with it. But I only left New York because my first wife wanted to get out of there.
So how long have you lived in Kirksville?
Yeah, I graduated in 1983 from Michigan State with a PhD. I applied for jobs. I was looking especially for tenure track jobs, ones that could be permanent and give you tenure. The best offer I got was from what was then Northeast Missouri State in Kirksville, Missouri, a town I'd never heard of, a school I'd never heard of. But I thought, well, I'll take a chance with it. And accepted the job in '83 as assistant professor, and I've been here ever since. I almost left in '88. I took a 1-year leave of absence, was thinking of moving to Connecticut with Kahneman, but decided instead to come back. So I've been here 38 years.
What stood out for you about Kirksville?
Well, the thing is, since if I had gone straight from New York to Kirksville, I probably would have been in absolute shock, But the first move we made was to Columbus. And Columbus, Ohio is a pretty big city. But mostly the part we were on was just this big college campus, and there were people, there was a lot less ethnic mix. There were African Americans, and there were white people, and that was about it. You didn't meet too many Asians or Latinos or any other, not many. I had made a lot of Jewish friends at NYU, and there weren't many in Columbus. And then Columbus, the first time I had like Domino's pizza, I almost cried, because I was used to having this wonderful pizza you have in every pizzeria in New York City, including right there in Queens. So that was sad. But anyway, then we went to East Lansing, which was kind of a fun college town. I liked East Lansing better than I had liked Columbus. And then I lived for 2 years in Hickory Corners, Michigan, a super small town, because my wife had to study at the biological station, the Kellogg Biological Station, which was like 60 miles from East Lansing. So I lived in a really small town. So when I came to Kirksville, it was a bigger town than Hickory Corners had been. But still, it was difficult getting used to Kirksville, to everybody mispronouncing my name, to people actually saying stuff like at church or some other place, like, y'all aren't from around here, are you? That kind of thing, which I still occasionally even get now after all these years. The lack of ethnic diversity was one of the main reasons my Cuban wife didn't like it here, especially back then. Even on the faculty, there were only maybe one or two native speakers of Spanish, someone she could speak Spanish with. It's not much to do. The students back then used to complain because there wasn't a mall nearby. Now malls are kind of fading from importance with online shopping, but that was another thing. You had to go to Columbia just to do any real shopping. No really good restaurants. Well, actually, we had one or two that were okay, but nothing like if you're in a big city. And then the people, too, just were not... I was kind of an exotic just from being an Italian-American from New York. Both things, Italian-American and from New York, was just... Now, some of the students found that interesting and fun, but it still kind of set me off from everybody else. And so it was kind of a tough adjustment.
So what things have you done that have made Kirksville feel more like home for you?
Well, one thing is just a matter of time passing. I've been here so long now. Another thing is having children. With my second wife, we have 4 children. And, getting involved in their activities. I've coached soccer and basketball and Little League and gotten to know people that way. Meeting having good friends from the faculty and occasionally from other reasons. And so anytime, I'm a fairly simple guy. I'm not super sophisticated or anything. So to me, just going over someone's house and having a nice meal and sitting around and talking, if I can do that, periodically, I'm pretty happy. And then when the summers came, get to go back to New York or do some other traveling. So, I realized there are a lot of nice people here, and I've always loved the students. I mean, really super high percentage of students that I get along with and are nice folks, and I help them along in their next step. So that's a very gratifying profession, just being a teacher and sharing things you think are valuable with the students. And the students come from all over. There are a lot of them from St. Louis and Kansas City, but there's students from all over the world that come here and from different parts of the country, and it's great to get to know them and interact with them. So the life of a university professor has, for me, always been a really great life. So, and I get to teach courses. When I first came here, I taught a lot of composition, but later on, I got to teach creative writing and American Lit and Latin American Lit and mystery fiction, so I get to teach really a great variety of courses that I enjoy teaching.
Do you keep any mementos from where you've grown up or where you have lived?
Mementos? Well, I have a lot of old photos, of my family. There's a picture of my dad just right in my office. My parents made it to 91, each of them, but then they passed away. They've been gone for several years now. I've got a lot of, I've got some old photos mostly. I do have stuff, my writing from when I was a kid. I saved some of my writing in a big folder because I was interested in being a writer from a young age. So I have some stuff, yeah. But of course I can go back. I have 2 unmarried sisters who live in the house I grew up in. So I can still see that old house any time. And again, we never moved out of that neighborhood. Every change was fine with us because like I said, we learned from my mother especially to enjoy meeting people from all walks of life and all races and ethnicities and to get along with the neighbors who are good neighbors. And we've had great luck with that. So anyway, they still live in that house, so I can still show my kids, this is where I grew up. As a matter of fact, my son did an internship in Manhattan several years ago with Field and Stream magazine, and so he lived with my sisters during that time period. So he made the same walk I would make to get to the subway to go into Manhattan on the A train that I used to do when I went to NYU. So he kind of relived my life for about 6 weeks as he lived in that house that I grew up in and took the same walk and the same train to get to his internship.
I also really love the idea of food being a reminder of home, or like making wherever you are home. How has food helped make you feel like you're at home wherever you are?
Yeah, I forget, 25 or 30 years ago, Antonio Scuderi moved here to teach Italian for us, and he's of Sicilian heritage, and he grew up in Long Island, when Queens is part of Long Island, and he's about my age, so we have so much in common. So we would cook together. On Christmas Eve, I think I already mentioned that Christmas Eve was always a seafood dinner, so on Christmas Eve, more than half a dozen times, he and I and our families, and a couple of times Ralph Capelli, and a couple of times James Chanciola, who I'm friendly with too, and is also Italian-American, we all got together and made a Christmas Eve meal. We also do Italian food sometimes together when it's not Christmas. Furthermore, there's a special pastry that's made for St. Joseph's Day, and my name is Joseph, so that was the Saint's Day in European culture, the day of your saint, who you were named after, is at least as important or more important than your birthday. And on St. Joseph's a big saint for the Italian-American community, so they always made a special pastry in the Italian bakeries for that week. And I've always missed that because it's on March 19th, and I'm never home back in Queens on March 19th. Maybe once I have been in 35 years. But my daughter and I decided to try and make it ourselves, and about 3 years ago we made the St. Joseph's Day pastries, and they came out pretty well. So yeah, and during Christmas we make a bunch of cookies that my mother taught us, biscotti and other Italian-American cookies, and recently I've been making this thing called the ricotta cookie. So my family, really knows a lot about their culture through food. I make my mother's homemade pasta sauce, which she learned from her mother, and homemade meatballs. And we had my daughter Margaret, the youngest daughter, she insists on having lasagna for her birthday each time, even if it's in the middle of the week and it's a little bit tricky to get that all prepared and ready. But of course, we really tremendously enjoy having that homemade lasagna. And then this past summer, I went back to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I have some cousins who were their mother was my mother's sister, and they wound up in Tulsa because of their father's work, and they'd kind of forgotten how to do the Italian food, so I went there and taught them the lasagna recipe, and we made 2 gigantic lasagnas, and we had a whole big, all their family came and enjoyed that. So yeah, to me, I think food is really central to many cultures, but certainly Italian-American is one of them, and so I've tried to keep with. I'm not a great cook. I don't know a zillion recipes, but I do love to bake, and I do know that the homemade pasta sauce, and yeah, all the kids are learning that, and ethnicity gets somewhat obliterated in the small town Midwest. For example, my wife, her maiden name's Carol Foey, but her father's real name was Ofehi, so they're kind of like letting the Irish go there. Her mother was Florence Phillips, but her real name was Filipovich, which is a Polish name, but they Americanized it. And that was before she grew up in New Jersey, but then she moved, she got married to my father-in-law, they moved here, they live in Palmyra, Missouri, an even smaller town, and their ethnicity just gets obliterated. They don't ever talk about, well, maybe occasionally about their Polish heritage, never about their Irish heritage. So I actually encourage my daughter to look up some Polish recipes, and she makes a special Polish cookie now for Christmas time, because again, I want them to connect to their cultural heritage a little bit. And
so, having lived in Kirksville, what have been some of your favorite things about Kirksville?
Well, my son has become just a fishing fanatic, and so we've spent lots of time fishing, and we know every place to go within 50 miles of here. I have a daughter that's older than my son, my first child. I took her fishing a bunch too, and so she enjoys it too, but not like my son. He's just, so we spent a lot of time fishing, a lot of time. I played basketball Tuesdays and Thursdays, a kind of faculty, staff, student game first in Pershing and then later at the rec center. And that was just steady twice a week during the lunch hour. Played basketball. Also played softball every summer, and I enjoyed that a lot. Enjoyed just taking walks in the different wooded areas, and just even in our neighborhood now. We live in College Park now. There's a nice little lake. We like to take walks. And then, again, like I said, interacting and hanging out with friends. Actually, it's getting a little sad because so many people have retired, and many of them, when they retire, they move away or you don't see them as much. So I have probably fewer social contacts now than I had 10 or 20 years ago. But whenever I do have that opportunity, of course, COVID has made that impossible for a year or two, but I like to be able to get back to those gatherings. And of course, we also have family nearby, my wife's family, and so we, for example, will be going there for Thanksgiving.
Those all sound like wonderful things for people to, I guess, look for or kind of find something that's similar that they can do while, like, they're trying to make a home here in Kirksville.
Yeah, I think the important thing is not, when I was first in Columbus, Ohio, I was just always ragging on Columbus and saying, oh, New York is better, New York's the greatest, this place stinks, and that doesn't make you too many friends, and after a couple of months I got over it, and certainly by the time I got to Kirksville, I realized, accept this place for what it is. It's a town of 17,000 out of 7 million, and it's not going to have as many things, but there are some nice people here. You can make your favorite foods or find other people who like to cook. You can find fun activities to do. You can enjoy the fact that you don't have traffic jams and a lot of crime and other things that you do have to worry about in a big city. So enjoy the things that are the best parts of living in a small town.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for coming and doing this interview for the podcast.
Okay, well, thanks for asking me, and it was good to see you again. And yeah, I like to talk about myself, so it's been fun.
Thank you for listening to our story today on Making Kirksville Home. If you want to hear more incredible stories about the people who live in Kirksville, keep listening to our podcast. Music by Blue Dot Sessions from their album, The Pine Barrens. This show was produced by Leighya McNeely with assistance from Dr. David Price, Josie Wagner, and Anas Al-Hassani. For more news and entertainment from the Truman Media Network, go to tmn.truman.edu.